heart, an aching heart. And, of course, it was a play of words, and we know that. And they talked about hope was defeated at Ai, and hope was dissolved in tears, in hearts, and hope was misplaced. And he finished with hope became a door. So that's just to let them know that I do listen. I wonder how many of you could have done that. You would have had to do what I do. I had to go back and listen a wee bit and take a photograph of something that I had. But it was about hope. And after the meeting, my heart was stirred. I've been looking at the story of Joseph in my devotions and preparing some thoughts on it. And afterwards, I said to Daphne, you go on, I need to sit here for a minute. And I talked with the pastor, and I shared something with him that was very relevant to what he had just preached. And it was like it's a follow-up to what the pastor had just ministered. And, of course, the pastor does what he always does. He says, put it in paper, send it to me. So Sunday afternoon, I said to Daphne, I've got something burning in my heart. I need to go upstairs. And I went upstairs, and I sent the pastor the message you're about to hear at 9:16, to be exact, 9:15 on Sunday evening. And why do I say that? I say that because I need you to grasp maybe today that this is burning in me. This is absolutely burning in me. And not only is it burning in me, but it's something that I know without doubt will bless people here this morning. And the story is very simple. It's a follow-on because the pastor's message was hope for an aching heart. And my message is simply the Joseph story, hope after hurt. Hope after hurt. You see, whenever you read the Joseph story in the Old Testament, it's all about hurt. There's so much hurt everywhere you look. You cannot read the Joseph story without finding hurt. Be careful that hurt does not leave you feeling hopeless. And that really is the gist of what I want to say. Hope after hurt in the Joseph story. So having said that, I just want to read just a selection of verses from chapter 37 of Genesis. They will come up before you. Jacob lived in the land of his fathers. Now, Jacob, of course, was Joseph's father. Joseph being 17 years old. I need you to catch that, if you would, because that helps to explain something to do with the hurt. This young man was 17 years old when these things began to happen. He was pasturing the flock with his brothers, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, they hated him. Please get that. They hated him. Hate is like a tree. It produces fruit called hurt. Hate and hurt go together. They hated him. They hated him. And they hated him, and they couldn't speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Can you catch that? They hated him even more. And he said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered round and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us? And they hated him even more. So you can see this hate was building up, can't you? And this hate was certainly going to lead to a lot of hurt. And they hated him more because of the dreams and because of his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars are bowing down to me. And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come and bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous. Catch that too, because that happens. That's a part of where hurt comes from. And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the sayings in his heart or in his mind. Now his brothers went to pasture the father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them." They saw him from afar, and behold, as he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, that we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben, he was the eldest brother, heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said this to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into the pit there in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him." And his plan was that he might rescue him out of their hands and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped it in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days, and he refused to be comforted. In these verses that I've just read, we see hurting people. And I want to talk about 3 different peoples who are hurting that maybe don't become obvious, but as we do the story, they will become obvious. Joseph obviously was hurting. Jacob, Joseph's father, he really was hurting in this story. And then, strangely, Joseph's brothers, they also were hurting too. Those 3 different peoples who are hurting. Now, of course, when we get to Joseph, it's quite easy to see something about Joseph's hurting. Joseph was rejected at home and suffered the bitterness of brothers. And the cause and consequences of Joseph being rejected at home was that he was deeply hurting. Here's what it says. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, and he made him a robe of many colors. And when his brothers saw that, the father loved him more than his brothers. They hated him. They hated him. And of course, we know that as Joseph told them the dream, the first dream, they hated him more. And then when he told them the second dream, they hated him even more and were jealous of him. And here is Joseph. And this young man, remember, 17 years of age. 17 years of age, and he's suffering all this jealousy, this hurt, this bitterness of his brothers in his own home. I don't know what you think, but I think, wow, as a young man of 17, how can he live with that? His brothers were so jealous, so full of hatred, rejection, bitterness. And this young man, at 17 years of age, finds himself in a pit. And he finds himself that his brothers are so bitter against him. And of course, the hurt begins to happen. As he's down in the pit, the hurt begins to happen. What are they going to do with me? What's going to happen to me? Am I going to die? 17 years of age. My brothers hate me. There's bitterness. There's jealousy. There's hurt. There's everything now for a young man of 17 in the pit. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're saying today, I'm hurt. I'm hurt because of my family. I'm hurt because of people. I'm hurt. I feel rejected. Feel hatred. Feel jealousy. Feel bitterness. And it's hurt me so much. I've carried this hurt for so many years, Roy. And my message today is, I'm going to show you where there's hope after hurt as we come to the end of this story. And if you're hurting like this, and you've never been able to get over it, because we put masks on, we put the smile on, but deep inside, we have been hurt so much that we can't get over it. And later on, I'm going to show you that there's hope after hurt. And then, of course, as the story goes on, they sold Joseph, verse 28. The Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. So Joseph finds himself now, he's heading towards Egypt. Having suffered rejection, hatred, bitterness, jealousy, as a young man of 17, it's left its mark upon him. And it's left its mark upon you. And then we find that Joseph was slandered at work. Things worked out not too bad for him, and suddenly he was slandered at work. There was this slander that came into his life. We read about it in chapter 39. Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. But I want you to notice verse 2, it says the Lord was with Joseph. So wherever the hurt you might be feeling today, I need you to get this, that the Lord is with you. The Lord is with you. Whatever the hurt, whatever the jealousy, whatever the bitterness, whatever it is you faced, God is with you. God was with Joseph. And he became a very successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. And I don't want to read the whole story, but when we get down to verse 7, it says, and after time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me or sleep with me, but he refused. And then one day, whenever he was in the house alone, she caught him again and said, you are going to lie with me. And he ran out, left his coat, and you know the story. How that whenever her husband came home again, he made up this excuse, or she made up this excuse that Joseph had tried to rape her, and suddenly Joseph finds himself in prison. But in verse 21 it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Now try to catch this. Joseph, this young man, having suffered rejection, hate, jealousy, bitterness, all of this from his own family, now at work he's slandered. And he finds himself in prison. Can you imagine the hurt he must be feeling? Maybe today you're hurting because people have said stuff about you. And it hurts. It really hurts. And although you know about it, and they are saying it, and it's slander, and it's all of that, it just adds to the hurt that you have had. This man is hurting. This young man, he's hurting. He's been slandered. He's suffering the wickedness of the world and the bitterness of his brothers and the hatred and the jealousy. It's all coming upon him. And he's hurting because all of this leaves its mark on you. And maybe that's how you feel. Just hurt because of something that's been said. Any hope for this? Well, we're going to find later on that there is hope for this. There is hope. And then when we get through to Genesis 40, I know I'm skipping the story, but I have to do this to cover the message that I want to cover today. In Genesis 40, we find that sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker had committed an offense against the king. And Pharaoh was angry, so he put them both into the prison. And of course, they both had that dream. And when they told the dream to Joseph, Joseph says, I can give you the interpretation. And he told them, he said, one of you is going to be taken and restored to your position. And when the other one heard that, he said, oh, that's brilliant news. What about my dream? He said, you're going to be killed. Wow. And Joseph only asked one thing in verse 14. It says, only remember me when it's well with you. And yet withal, it says in verse 23, and the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Rejected at home, suffered bitterness of his brothers, slandered at work, suffered wickedness, and now the forgetfulness of friends. He's hurting. Is there any hope? I visited somebody last week. He's a good friend. He's been unwell. He's spent his life in ministry. He's in his 80s. And I can't get away from the picture that I saw when he looked at me and he said, Roy, I've given all my life to serve people, to help people, to minister to people, to pray with people, to be kind to people. And I'm sitting here, Roy. Thank you for coming. Because you're one of very few who even bothers. And I felt the hurt in his voice. And it tore my heart. Because I know this man. And I really do know how he has ministered to people and give his life ministering into people's lives and helping people in huge problems. This came to mind, the forgetfulness of friends. You see, friends, it does hurt. It does hurt. I'm going back to see him probably tomorrow, and I'm going to share some of what I'm preaching to you to help him. Because there's hope after hurt. And maybe something I've said this morning concerning the brothers and the wickedness and the jealousy and the hurt and the pain and the slander and the talking of people behind backs and friends that you thought were your friends that have let you down. And you're saying, oh, Roy, you have no idea how much this applies to me. And you're hurting. But God's going to do something today to help you with that. Because there's hope after hurt. Now we move on to chapter 41. And after 2 years, so we find 2 years has passed since his friend was restored to his position, the cupbearer. 2 years has passed, and Pharaoh, it says, dreamed that he was standing in the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass, and behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile, and the ugly and thin cows, they ate up the 7 attractive and plump cows. And Pharaoh woke up. What was all that about? And he got back to sleep again, and he dreamed another dream. He dreamed another dream. And the dream was simply this. Behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, there sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full. And he woke up in a dream going, what's all this? And he was troubled. And he sent for those that he sends for to help him. And nobody could help him. Nobody could give him the interpretation of what was happening. And then I read these words in verse 9 of the chapter 41. Then the chief butler said to Pharaoh, I remember. Oh, I remember. And this is the beginning of something changing. Joseph, God is about to redirect your life. And you're going to begin to see hope after hurt. And maybe this morning, God is going to redirect your life. And you're going to experience hope after hurting. I believe that. I really do believe that. Then verse 14, it says, Joseph sent and called, Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit, and he got himself ready, and he came before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and there is no one that can tell me what it means. And Joseph answered him and said, it is not me but that can tell you, but God can give you the answer. And then Joseph explains to him. Joseph told the king the 7 good years of harvest will be followed by the 7 years of famine. There will be 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after that there will arise 7 years of famine. And all the plenty will be forgotten in the land. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, because it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dreams means that it's fixed by God. It's going to happen. Now Pharaoh, Joseph instructs him, select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land, and let him, in the times of plenty, put aside something for in times of harvest. That's the short version of it. Verse 38 says this, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none more discerning than you and wise. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, see, I have set you over all of the land. Hope after hurt. God did something. And he did more than what we have covered at the moment that I'm going to deal with at the end. But God did something. And this man, young man, he was in his 30s by this stage. But this young man now finds himself that God has intervened in his life. And is he hurting? Yes, there's been the hurt. And I'm going to show you how God dealt with that at the end, but there was the hurt. But God began to give him hope. And I want you to see that God's giving you hope today. But now I want to move on to something else that caught my attention as I did this story. Never seen this before. And talking about Jacob, his father. Here was a man who was hurting so much. Let me read it to you in chapter 37 again, just a few verses. And they took Joseph's robe, this is his brother's, and they slaughtered a goat and dipped it in the robe in the blood. And they sent a robe of many colors and brought it in to the father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it's your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, "This is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And he refused to be comforted. He's hurting, isn't he? He's hurting. But as I read this, something kept niggling at me, saying, you're missing something. He's hurting. He refused to be comforted. If you read the story, his sons there, right there, he refused to be comforted. But hold on a minute, there's something not right here. Jacob is hurting because he made his own assumptions. What he thinks happened did not really happen. Please get this. This is so important. And if you read the story carefully, his other sons never told him that Joseph was dead. They presented him with some evidence. Oh, I know what they were trying to do, but they never told him. And having been presented with this evidence, Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Jacob is hurting here because he made his own assumptions of what he thought happened that didn't happen. Have you got that? And for 20 years, he was hurting about something that wasn't real because Joseph was alive. And I read this somewhere. I can't tell you where, to be honest, but it was fear. Let me explain. It was false evidence appearing real. F-E-A-R. False evidence appearing real. Jacob, it's not what it looks like. It's not Joseph's blood that's on the coat. And for 20 years he was hurting because he thought wrongly. It wasn't what it looked like. And I'm asking today, could you be hurting today about something that was false evidence appearing real? Could you be hurting about something you thought that wasn't real and that you've carried the hurt for 20 years? Maybe the person never really said that. Maybe they never really did it. Maybe you were misled, tricked by the devil to hurt you. And this hurt that Jacob felt was so unnecessary. So what's hurting you today? Is it real? It's real because it hurts. But is it real because it really happened? Or did you get distracted from the real problem that looked real but wasn't? Because you made an assumption. As I went over this morning again, when I got to this bit, the Spirit of God spoke into my heart. And simply said this for somebody in this meeting. The hurt that you feel has been caused by somebody who's now dead. And it wasn't real. And God says this to you. Today, I'm going to set you free from that hurt. Because it never was real. And you've carried it for years and years and years. Because of an assumption that you made. Because of false evidence appearing real. And you've carried it, and it's hurt you. And God says today very clearly, I'm going to set you free from that. The only thing he asks is that you're willing to let it go. I have no idea who that's for, but I certainly know it's for someone. The hurt that you feel, what you were told is not right, and the person is dead. But God says, I can set you free from it if you're willing to let it go. Now, moving on to chapter 37 again, verse 11. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in his mind. You see, Jacob forgot, or he didn't grasp what God had said. God had a plan that is far greater than anything that he thought about. And you're hurting today because you have accepted something that's not real. And God has a plan far better than you've ever thought about. If Jacob would have grasped what Joseph said, he would have known that one day we're all going to bow before him. So he couldn't be dead. But he never grasped it. And you know, there are sometimes when God speaks to us and we don't grasp it. And God says, if you could only grasp what I say, if you could only believe me, it would save so much hurt in your life. So they went out of Egypt. Chapter 45, of course, what happens now in chapter 45, and the brothers have been several times, and now Pharaoh says, or Joseph says, go back and get my father and bring him here. So here's the story now. We're coming toward the end of the story. And in chapter 45, it says this in verse 25. So they went out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. So the brothers have all come to their father. And they told him, listen to this. Joseph is still alive. What? Verse 26, Joseph is still alive. And he's ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart became numb because he couldn't take it in. And then they told him all the words of Joseph. And he looked out and saw the wagons that Joseph had sent, and I preached on that a long time ago. And the spirit of their father revived. And he said, it's enough. It's enough. Joseph, my son, is alive. I will go and see him before I die. Hope after hurt. Hope after hurt. Can you imagine what this man 20 years later, and as the sons come rolling up the lane with all these wagons, and they come in and he stands and looks out and goes, what's going on? And they say, we need to talk to your dad a minute. What is it? What is it? What's happened now? No, come in, Dad. You know the way you've been hurting all these years because of Joseph? Joseph is alive. What? Joseph is alive. Joseph is alive. Joseph is alive. All this hurt for these years was unnecessary because Joseph is alive. Oh, today, all this hurt for all these years, unnecessary because you took something up wrong. Wow. Can you get that? Wow. Now I need to move on. I'll come back there at the end as well. Joseph's brothers. You might say, why? How could they be hurting? How could they be hurting? Well, I'm going to show you how they're hurting. They hurt because they carried 20 years of guilt. Let me say it again. They hurt because they carried 20 years of guilt. Genesis 42. And Joseph's talking to them, and he's playing a game because he wants to see if their hearts have changed. And he says, if you're honest men, let one of your brothers remain here in custody, and you go and bring back your younger brother to me, Benjamin. And in verse 21 it says this. Then they said to one another, here's their conversation. Please understand, they're having this conversation in front of Joseph, but they don't know Joseph knows what they're saying because there's an interpreter in between them, and they don't know him. Here's what they say. In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we would not listen. This is why all this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered and said, did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? But you would not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. And they did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. And Joseph turned away from them and wept. 20 years, these guys have lived with this guilt. And it was hurting. They were hurting too. There's nobody in this story that doesn't hurt for different reasons. And maybe that's you today. Something's happened. And here's the one thing that you can't cope with. You can't forgive yourself. You can't forgive yourself. And God wants to deal with that today. Because he's going to make it clear to you that he has forgiven you, and it's time for you to forgive yourself and move on. Wow. Is there any hope after hurt? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We're into chapter 45, verse 1. Then Joseph could not control himself before all that stood by. And Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud. And Joseph said to his brothers, can you catch this? I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? What? I am Joseph. But the brothers did not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me. Come near to me. And they came near, and he says, I'm Joseph, your brother, that you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed or angry, because God had a plan. Oh. As I prepared this jumped out at me. Do not be distressed or angry with yourself. Wow. Somebody needs to hear that this morning. Because I know Joseph was hurting, and I know why, and I know Jacob was hurting, and I know why. But I also know that Joseph's brothers were hurting. They carried this guilt for 20 years. Everything that went wrong, they said, it's because of what we did. And Joseph says, come near to me. Let's end this today. Let's end all this hurt today. Let's end it all. I read this some time ago, and I copied it. And I thought, one day, I'm going to use this. Today is the day. Don't allow the pain of your past to blur your vision and steal the blessing that God has in store for you today and for the future. God says, do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old, because I'm going to do a new thing. A new thing. New thing. You've grieved, literally grieved, over your guilt and sin. And grieving is healthy. But when you get stuck in the past, it's always at the expense of the future. There comes a time when you must stop talking and thinking about what you cannot change. And there comes a time when you must accept God's solution, His forgiveness, and realize you have a purpose. Wow. Joseph's brothers need to hear that. And you need to hear it today. Do not let the pain of your past blur the vision of the blessing that God has for you today. Now I want to finish with this. I'm really just wrapping it all up here. Joseph was hurt so much, but was there hope after hurt? Yeah, let me tell you how the hope came. Genesis chapter 41, it tells me that Joseph was married and he had two kids. Here's what it says in Genesis 41. The words are going to come up before you. Genesis 41, verse 50, 51, 52. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. And Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God hath made me forget all my hardship or all my hurt. Wow. And then he had another son, and it says the name of the second he called Ephraim, because God has made me fruitful. And when I put them both together, here's what happened in Joseph's life. It was time to forget the hurt and to move on and to be fruitful. Wow. Now, he didn't forget what happened to him, because he said to his brothers, I am Joseph, you're the one that sold me into Egypt. So he had it all there. But it says here, God hath made me forget my hardship. God has made me forget my hurt. God has made me fruitful. And I know that God's saying today, God says, I will help you to forget your hurt, and I will make you fruitful if you're prepared to let the hurt go. That's the message. That's how Joseph coped with this. I'm not going any further, because I know that's where God wants me to be, right here. And for those who are hurting so immensely, here's God's words. If you are willing to let the hurt go, I am willing to help you to forget it. You'll not forget what, but you'll forget the hurt. And I will make you fruitful. Let me get it again now. Here's what God's saying. If you're willing to forget the hurt, leave it alone, give it up, God says, I'll help you to forget your hurt, and I will make you fruitful. And it changed Joseph's life. Jacob, he was willing to let go of his hurt. What do you mean? What do you mean? Well, when they come back and said, Joseph is alive, he said, what? I will go and see him. I'll leave the hurt behind. And his brothers, they were willing. when Joseph says, come near to me. Come on, boys. Don't be angry with yourself. God had a plan. Forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. I've forgiven you. Forgive yourself. Forget the hurt. Forget it. And move on. Do not remember the former things. Don't even consider the things of old. Because I'm going to do a new thing with you. It's time to stop grieving over the past and to look for God's purpose in the future. That's it. That's it. And I have no doubt today that God wants to set people free. But as I went over this and said, God, how am I going to close? God put this very clearly to me, because I can tell you what I'm going to do. In a moment, I'm going to give you an opportunity to walk up to the front so we can pray. But God said, and God was very specific in this. So make it clear, Roy. If they are prepared to forget the past and move on, I will help them to forget the hurt and make them fruitful. But if they're not prepared to leave the past behind, they needn't bother coming, because I can do nothing with them. That's very clear, isn't it? Because that's this story. Joseph, God made me forget all my hardship. And God made me fruitful. Jacob, I've left all my hurt in Egypt. I'm going to see Joseph. And the brothers, we have forgiven ourselves. Joseph has forgiven us. Now we need to forgive ourselves and move on. So today, I'm asking you very, very simply, whatever the hurt is, however it's happened, whatever the story behind it, if you're prepared to say this today, I'll leave it behind, Roy. And I'll walk out and I'll say to God, as I leave it behind, I'm finished with my hurt. And I'm trusting God to help me to forget all my hurt and to make me fruitful. And if that's you today, as we bow our heads, would you get up and just walk to the front? And would you do it right away, please? I know that God is doing something this morning, because the burden that I had for this message was incredible. Incredible. Anyone else? I don't want to force people to come, because if you're willing to leave your hurt behind, no matter how it's happened, if you're willing to leave it behind, leave it behind. Say, I'm coming out now, God. Help me to forget my hurt and make me fruitful. Might be a family hurt. Might be a relationship hurt. I'm just going to wait just a little longer. If this has affected you today, I believe God wants to help. This is not about who prays for you, you know. You know, who prays for you doesn't matter. It's who we're praying to that matters. Maybe somebody needs to hear that. It's God that has to do the work. We can only do what we know to do, but God will do the work. Pastor.
So, well, thank you for the message. It's a sobering moment, and I know it's fearful. Thank you for the people that responded, and fear that works in people's hearts. And we think sometimes we're over issues that we're not over, and we're plagued with this sense that we just feel many disappointments, and we haven't realized that the disappointments have taken so much root that there's a perpetual, you expect the disappointment because hurt's at the bottom of it. So I'm going to ask everyone in a second just to stand to your feet, okay? And it's a purpose. Well, Stuart can stand up, he's all right, leave him alone. But in a second, and as we get up, I'm going to tell you something, okay? You see when you sit on your bum, and you just say, well, I'm going to sit here and I'm not going to move because you're petrified. And you know that God's speaking to you, but you're sitting there saying, I'm not moving because I don't want people to know. And who really cares, to be really honest, because it's you is the one that's caught. So I'm going to get everybody to move together, and I'm going to say, listen, if there's something in your heart, you just need to do business with the Lord. Because you're already moving, just walk down. Have you got what I'm saying? I've identified time and time again hurts that live in me. You know, so I'm part of the number right when you're praying. So are you ready? I'm talking to you who you know, this is the turn and opportunities to set it down and say, God, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. So are we ready? Let's stand up and just start moving. Come on. Come on, you know I'm talking. Just stand up. Come on, you're moving. That's you moving. Start walking. Just come down. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on, let's deal with this. Let's deal with this, guys. This is about Jesus. Come. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. We're just doing it with the Lord. Just come and just say, God, I'm laying this down. I'm laying it down. I'm laying it down. I know some of you are still caught, but listen, I want to appeal to you. Just come and do business. There's no sense carrying it. I know there's a lady at the minute who's actually contemplating, I need to be there. And you're standing there thinking, I'm not going to move. And probably now I'm saying it, it's going to even more entrench you. But I still want to appeal to you to move. You move now. Come. Just come. Come on. Come on. Get somebody to bring you out. Do something. But let's go. Come on. Come on. Come on. We're waiting. We're waiting. Come. 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 Listen, there's already people here at the front of tears. Just come. You can't keep missing moments. You only get a shot at this life once. I can't.